Well, hello again. Hi, welcome everybody. I hope you've managed to successfully switch over if you were at the AGM, and welcome to everybody who's joining us right now. My name is Tamara. I am the president of the British Association for Modern Mosaic, and welcome to our 2021 forum, Reconnect. So I am here. I'm here to welcome you, but I'm going to go straight in because we are right on time. So let me just give you a brief overview for the day. We will be at 11. So right now we have the Mosaics of Chester Cathedral with Naomi Watts-Kitto, who is the conservator there. And at 12 o'clock, we will be having Tessa Hunkin talking about her Hackney Mosaic project. Then we have a lunch break at 1, and from 2 we've got Julie Sperling from Canada talking about connecting around a cause. We will then take a break, and at 3:30 we have a live make-along session hosted by Rachel Davies and Rachel Zager in the States. And this will go to make some pieces towards a collaborative installation that we're just about to hear a little bit more about. So let me hand over to Lorelei, Tracey, Aleta, and Naomi.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to have been asked to introduce the first session of the 2021 BAMM Forum, which is about the mosaics of Chester Cathedral. And it's a wonderful start to our event. For those of you who don't know, Chester is a historic city in the northwest of England, not far from its border with Wales to the west and on the east towards Liverpool and Manchester. You'll hear a bit more about the history of the cathedral in the video, but it's been a site for Christian worship since the Saxon times, and the current building has its foundations in the 13th century. So there's a really long history here. It's been a living building for 800 years and subject to much change over that time. And that includes the installation in the late 19th century of a major series of wall mosaics, as well as much stunning stained glass. It'll also be the site of a BAMM Northwest exhibition in 2022 entitled Constellations. The exhibition will show around 50 selected mosaic works reflecting the environment of the cathedral and its mosaics and showcasing some of the best of modern mosaic art. You're going to hear from 3 speakers in the video. Naomi Watts-Kitto, who's the curator of Chester Cathedral, and she'll be talking with her team about the challenges behind the restoration work and the restoration particularly of the Baptistry mosaic. Aleta Doran, who's artist in residence at Chester Cathedral, a BAMM member and curator of the Constellations exhibition. She's going to talk about her role as an artist in residence. And finally, you'll hear from Tracey, Cartledge, Manchester-based mosaic artist, vice chair of BAMM, and with Aleta, the driving force behind the Constellations exhibition. And she's going to talk more about the space and the arrangements for the exhibition. There'll be a Q&A after the video, but the beauty of a digital event is that you don't have to wait to the end to ask your questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Just press that, type in your questions, and I'll be back to ask them on your behalf in due course at the end of the video. It only remains for me to say, sit back, enjoy the video and the opportunity to soak up the history and the atmosphere of this wonderful building, and start planning your trip to Chester for the Constellations exhibition next year. Thank you.
Welcome to Chester Cathedral. To begin today, Naomi, Tom and Harriet of the Works Department describe their roles in conserving this beautiful building.
Hello, my name is Tom Livingstone and I'm one of the resident stonemasons at Chester Cathedral. I've been employed here for 2.5 years, and during that time it's been a very interesting experience to get to know this amazing building more intimately, especially being allowed into areas where the general public are not allowed due to health and safety reasons. Such as the triforiums, the galleries, and areas that have been untouched since the medieval builders originally built them. Some of the more interesting things that we found here are things like medieval tiles. We've found shards of stained glass and things like that in excavations. We've recently been doing a job on the outside of this chapel where in 1868 the 15th century chapel was demolished in favour of this neo-Gothic creation by Sir George Gilbert Scott. While we were excavating and relaying flagstones out there, we found a number of artefacts that were from the original 15th century chapel, including wall lines and medieval tiles and so on.
Hello, I'm Harriet. I'm one of the stonemasons here. I've just recently joined. I came all the way from York over to Chester. I was at York College doing level 2 and level 3 in stonemasonry, and now this is my first on-site job, and I'm really excited to join the team. We're a small team, and there's lots of space for us to grow and develop and really start the works department being properly established in the cathedral. I'm really looking forward to using the Thermatech machine, which is a machine for cleaning the stone. It uses high temperature but low pressure, so it doesn't damage the stone, but it washes off a lot of the plant life and algae and things that grow on the stone, and you get really good results from it. At the moment, we're just about to finish a job on the paving just outside here, where a tree root has muddled up the paving and we've set it back down. So I've been learning lots of skills about mortar skills and pointing and lots of things that I'll probably be using quite a lot over the next few weeks, months and years.
Hello, I'm Naomi. I'm the conservator here at Chester. My responsibilities lie with conserving the building, so that can involve anything from stonework, flooring, decorative arts, decorative features of the cathedral, so mosaics, gilding. If there's anything that breaks immediately, I tend to be there to consult just in case it needs to go further, if we need to bring in external contractors, someone who's just a bit more specialised than I am. I particularly specialise in stone and decorative arts, so I came to Chester originally as a private contractor. I actually worked on the Erasmus Mosaic in 2018, at the end of 2018, and when the job finished, I was invited to apply for the position of conservator here, and I did, and I was successful. So February 2019 I started, and then the pandemic came, and towards the end of 2019 it was a really great opportunity to do some work in the cathedral without the public being there. And just to walk through and it's really quiet and there's nobody here. So I really enjoy working in a building of this scope. You wouldn't think, I didn't think when I graduated university that I would end up in a cathedral. I didn't think I'd end up doing building conservation, but here I am. And yeah, there's some really exciting projects that we can have going on here in the future. There's also reactive projects, so things that happen, we have to react to them really quickly. If there's any kind of damage, like water damage, to do with the ceilings and things like that. One of my favourite bits about Chester, there are lots of different things that I love about the cathedral. I love the choir stalls, the 14th century choir stalls. There's some work to do on those in the future with gilding the bosses above the seats in the canopies. Our stained glass is quite pretty as well. One of my favourite things of all time, though, has to be when we're up at high level and there's a little piece of graffiti, and it's amazing to see all the graffiti from all over the ages when you go up there, and things that people probably haven't seen for a very, very long time. And one of my favourite little pieces of graffiti is on a little bit of lime mortar in the south transept, and it's from 1463, and I don't know why, but I think it's just the thought of it being here so long and just being untouched. It's one of my favourite things, but it's just such a personal touch. Somebody's just taken the time to write the name and the date on a piece of mortar. Obviously, it's a bit different now. We don't want people coming in and writing the names on the walls everywhere, particularly things like Sharpie. But it's really nice to go up there, be down at lower level and come in and see the cathedral and look at the age of the building, but then also go up and just see the little personal touches that are up there as well. There's just the personal history of the building. Obviously you hear stories about people that used to live here, the Benedictine monks and Ranulph Higdon and things like that, but just to go in and see somebody's name, just to say, oh, I worked here, like the mason's marks, going around and going, oh, look, there's one and there's a different one. So that I really like going up at high level and just seeing all the bits that people don't normally get to see. Plus, when you come down and then people ask you what you do, you've got little interesting stories to tell them. So the project that I'm currently working on at the moment is the Baptistry Mosaic. It's in the base of the Norman Tower, and it's not an old mosaic. It was installed in 1885. It was designed by Dean Howson and installed by a company called Burke & Co. They also installed the mosaics on our north aisle as well. It's suffering from a little bit of salt damage. There was a carpet on top of it at one point as well, and a varnish. Both of those have now been removed just to allow for better surface ventilation. The end aim of the project is to lift the entire mosaic and reinstall it as a new floor, but to take away all that salty backing mortar that's currently underneath it. We're not going to be able to get rid of the salts completely forever because they're everywhere. They're in the walls and the floors and everything. But it's important to just have that surface ventilation going, just to make sure that we can keep it for the future, preserve it for the future, but it's also going to be functional as well. People are allowed to walk on it when the floor is finished. Not at the moment, it's unstable. But when the floor is finished, they'll be able to walk on it and then gain access to St Anselm's that way. The project is projected to take 5 years to complete from start to finish. That's currently just with me by myself. This isn't the first mosaic project I've worked on, so it's very familiar with the concept and the process that needs to happen in order to complete the work. Some of the pieces are just really small, so to do it, it's definitely the biggest mosaic I've done with the smallest pieces, and it's just very fiddly. Lots of people say to me, well, you must need an incredible amount of patience to do this kind of thing, and I've definitely learned a lot of patience on the job. So yeah, that's my big project at the moment, but then there's other things that will need to happen in the meantime as well. We've also got a new staff member coming, Will. He's not here at the moment, unfortunately, but he will be here joining us very soon. And Will comes from a masonry and joinery background, but he also has a heritage conservation background as well. So he'll be helping me doing various projects around the cathedral, and will have his own project set up as well. He's going to look at the fire doors at high access, which are also quite interesting as they have wallpaper on them, and the wallpaper print has transferred through to the wood. So they're quite nice to look at, but they're a bit unstable at the moment, so we need to look at addressing those at some point in the future. There are lots of jobs that need doing here at the cathedral, and I think we'll be around for a very long time, hopefully, fingers crossed. We'll be here for a long time in order to do the works that need to be done. And obviously there's challenges that will occur along the way in terms of, it's the same with anything, funding, but materials as well. The stone that the cathedral is made out of isn't actually quarried anymore. So the masons are currently going through a process of trying to find a replacement stone, and they are they've got in some stone samples, and they're going to be testing them for various things to do with water retention and durability when they're carved, and compression strength and crushing strength and things like that as well. So that'll be really interesting, and then they'll write a report to present to the architect and clerk of works, because we all work really closely together with other members of staff. It's really important that everyone's involved in the process to make sure that the best work is happening for the cathedral and its fabric, not necessarily for the people, but it's what's best for the building. And that's why we're here. We're here to look after the building, and we all love our jobs. And we could tell you that any day of the week. But yeah, we're here to look after the building. Just get to see all the little nooks and crannies that people don't normally get to see.
This is Chester Cathedral's banker shop. A banker shop is historically the place where stonemasons would carve complex stone components. The name banker shop comes from the name of the sturdy tables that we use to carve stone, often known as banker tables. In this workshop we will be producing a number of stone components that will be used in the upcoming work on Chester Cathedral.
Now, Naomi will describe the enormous task of restoring the Baptistry mosaic.
So here we are at the Baptistry mosaic. This is located in the base of the Norman Tower. Before the Victorians got here and installed this mosaic in 1885, there used to be walls here. It was enclosed. It used to be a wine cellar. Dean Howson designed this mosaic, and it was installed by a company called Burke & Co. from London, the same company that installed our North Aisle mosaics. And it was very unusual for a dean to be involved in the design process as Dean Howson was. It was very hands-on. He did get to see the final design, but unfortunately he passed away shortly afterwards. He was very sick, but he managed to make it back in time to see his pride and joy be installed. So the design is a sea of fish in the middle in a net. There are 51 fish and crustaceans in total, and they are surrounded by a wave pattern and the 7 heavenly virtues, and portraits representing the patron saints for each virtue. Most of them are in quite good condition, but unfortunately we have some at the west side of the mosaic that are in quite poor condition. This is due to excessive salt efflorescence. There's also quite a lot of wear in certain areas on the mosaic, just to the right of me here. This is because this area also used to be the children's corner, and a lot of children used to come on here and play. There used to be a desk, so there's a lot of particular area where there's a lot of scuff marks from feet and a lot of wear. Some of the tiles are quite soft and have worn more than others, and it's going to be a problem trying to replace these, trying to find something that's sympathetic, not just in appearance, but also its properties as well. You can't have something that's too hard next to a softer tile, because then you'll cause uneven wear on the softer tiles. It progresses the deterioration because the wear pattern will be different. We're hoping that there's not going to be too much tessera replacement. I think it will be likely, unfortunately, that we do need to replace some of them. But I'm hoping that once I've lifted them up, I'll be able to turn them over, and they look like brand new on the other side. So if they're usable, we can just flip them over. This does depend entirely on how much tile depth there is. If there isn't enough tile depth, then unfortunately they can't be used, because we can't guarantee proper adhesion of the mortar when we put them back in the floor, and they will just pop up really easily. So it's really important when we lift them up to just analyse them, just to make sure that they're actually suitable to go back in. The floor is currently suffering from excessive amounts of salt efflorescence, which is causing problems, and this is due to the fact that for a number of years the mosaic has been covered with a varnish and a carpet. So when I first came to Chester, I wasn't even aware that there was a mosaic underneath here, as there was the carpet on top, and it had been stuck on properly with tacking rods and various adhesives. And when we lifted the carpet, it was immediately clear that there was salt problems. So we removed the carpet, and then the varnish was underneath as well. I wasn't aware that the varnish was even there until the carpet pulled some of it away, and there was the true colour of the stone steps leading up to the Baptistry mosaic were revealed to be a lovely salmon colour. As we took the carpet away, the extent of the varnish became apparent, and it was quite bad. In some areas you couldn't even see the design at all through the varnish because it had discoloured that much over time. And the important thing at that stage was to remove the carpet and to remove the varnish to allow for better surface ventilation. Since that period, the salts have appeared on the surface, which is fine because it just means that there's better surface ventilation, but unfortunately, because those salts are underneath the mosaic within the substrate, they will need to be removed. We're not going to be able to get rid of all the salts properly or completely because the entire cathedral and the grounds are full of salts. But the best thing that we can do is to put in better materials just to allow for better ventilation, just to allow the salts to naturally come up through the grouting, rather than separate the tessera from the backing mortar, which is what's currently occurring. There are areas of loss on the surface, in some areas more than others where the salts are worse, and these areas of loss hopefully can be replaced. Some of the designs are easy to replicate from other areas. We can take drawings from other areas. There is one area on one of the faces of the patron saints that we don't, there is an area of loss, and unfortunately we aren't sure of the design as we don't have any paperwork to do with this project in our archive at all. So that's really disappointing, and as a result of this, I'm having to draw the entire design by hand so that when I come to lift the mosaic and then relay it, the design is the same. The only issue is in the area of loss where we don't have a copy of the design, it will have to go to, I can suggest a replacement or a suitable design replacement, and then that will have to go to the Fabric Advisory Committee, which is one of our regulatory bodies in the cathedral that decides on projects, and they will need to decide if the design is appropriate just because we don't have the original drawings. So we need to be sympathetic to the design. We also need to ensure that it's ethical as well, because we don't know the artist's true intentions, so we need to make sure that the design is appropriate.
Hi, I'm Aleta and I'm an artist in residence at Chester Cathedral. The film that we're about to show you shows the influence that role has on my work. I became artist in residence in January 2019. The role of artist in residence was something of a blank canvas. The only expectation was that I would demonstrate mosaic for visitors and possibly provide workshops. Initially, I worked on small mosaics at a table in the nave by the large marble mosaics. Reflecting on that time now, I would say that it took me a while to understand the full potential of the role. Before 2019, I'd spent some time photographing and researching Victorian mosaics in my local area. Here are some of my photos. And I was keen to encourage visitors to engage with the examples at Chester. I had samples of the materials available and props to explain the indirect method. During the autumn and winter months, there are fewer visitors, and it's very cold sitting at a table all day. I started to move around the cathedral with my camera and sketchbook. Looking through the lens of my camera, I began to focus on details. I was particularly interested in the depiction of angels in the carvings, mosaics, and stained glass. I was fascinated by their wings and feathers. In early 2020, my term as artist in residence was extended for another year, and we began to make exciting plans for summer activities, including making feather mosaics with visitors. All this stopped abruptly in March 2020 when the pandemic struck. How could I be an artist in residence during lockdown, confined to my studio with just my photographs and drawings? Initially, I enjoyed making small feather mosaics for friends, but as time passed, I felt I needed more challenge and direction in my work. I had no idea if or when I would be able to return to the cathedral. The opportunity to study online with the Prince's School of Traditional Arts presented itself. and I signed up for a series of geometry courses. I'd always loved the complex patterns of cosmatesque pavements and other forms of architectural decoration, and shielding gave me the time to explore this subject. Throughout this period of isolation, I used the online cathedral newsletter to give updates about my work, including photographs. The images you can see on the screen are my geometry investigations into patterns I had seen in Italy. Geometry requires a level of focus which completely distracted me from all the uncertainty and anxiety of the situation. Seeing patterns emerge from the underlying construction you draw with your compass is completely absorbing. Once you've begun to study geometry, I think you look at the world through new eyes, looking at flowers to understand their symmetry and considering the geometry of architecture and its decoration. I have also attended geometry workshops delivered by Liverpool School of Architecture. The Prince's School for Traditional Arts online summer school explored the quadrivium, and I found myself studying geometry, number, music, and cosmology. Early in 2020, I had spotted Venus shining brightly in the evenings, and during lockdown I had begun to look more carefully at the night sky. Following the summer school, I ordered some stargazing binoculars and downloaded a night sky app. I was fascinated. I find gazing up at the vastness of the night sky an experience full of wonder. During this time, I also connected through Twitter with other people who were interested in stained glass. Sharing my photos from Chester has been a real joy and has presented other opportunities for future projects and research. Finally, shielding ended for me in May this year, and I was able to return to the cathedral. The study I had undertaken gave me the confidence to return to the post with a sense of purpose and direction after so long in isolation. I'd been able to prepare for 2 exhibitions and a couple of other projects to take place over the next couple of years, and I'm really enjoying applying my understanding of geometry to the building and its decoration. I've been analysing the geometry of the vaults, the tracery, and the tiled pavements. My aim now is to combine geometry with the beautiful materials of Mosaic. Our exhibition Constellations connects all those ideas that sustained me: Mosaic, responding to a beautiful building, and the wonder of observing nature.
This is the vestibule space with its early Gothic stone columns. It's a beautiful, intimate space, and this is where we'll be receiving our special guests for the private view, which will take place on the 20th of March. From the vestibule, you come through another lovely stone Gothic archway, and then you're here in the chapter house. This is where the Constellations exhibition will take place in the spring. The exhibition will feature the work of artists from across the UK and from Europe. We have artists from the Netherlands and France, and also from the USA. In total, we've accepted 20 works of art which are wall-mounted. These mosaics will be displayed on bespoke display units, 10 of them in total, and these will run in 2 lines along the length of the chapter house. The display units will look very similar to the plinths we had made for In All Its Glory, an exhibition that BAMM Northwest took part in 5 years ago in the south transept of the cathedral. Except this time, they're going to be just a bit taller. Aleta and I, the co-curators of Constellations, first met when we showed our work at the 2016 exhibition. This piece is Farewell But Not Forever, Aleta's work that we chose to feature on the exhibition leaflet. And this is my piece, The Girl Who Fought for Education, inspired by the David and Goliath panel within the immense wall mosaics designed by John Richard Clayton in the north aisle of the cathedral's nave. In addition to the wall-mounted mosaics, we also have 11 sculptural freestanding pieces. The launch of the exhibition is at the private view on the 20th of March. This beautifully coincides with the spring equinox, and the exhibition then continues for a further 5 weeks, including the Easter holiday, We hope that gives you ample opportunity to get yourselves here in person to Chester. We also plan to create an online gallery, just like the website that we made for the online exhibition prompted last year. And this will include some additional works that unfortunately we cannot include in the chapter house due to the limits of the physical space. All of the work that's being created is being made especially for Constellations. None of it has ever been seen before, and most of it is only just being made right now. It's a very exciting time. Thank you. We're back.
Have I got everybody?
I think we're all here.
Good, excellent. Sorry, I can't see you. I can only see you, Tracey, but that's brilliant. That was absolutely terrific, and it's just such a great example of how Mosaic's been really undervalued a lot through the 20th century. The fact that somebody stuck a carpet down on top of a mosaic is quite a thought, isn't it? And but one of the things I did love is the fact that Naomi, you're planning to restore it as a pavement so that people can actually walk on it, which I think is just terrific. Naomi, can I ask you a question about your route into work as a conservator? You mentioned having worked for a contractor previously, but I wondered whether you'd taken a kind of arts route into that work or a science route.
So originally, I wanted to be a maths teacher, and it didn't quite work out, unfortunately. And I really enjoyed history when I was younger, and I really enjoyed art, because I never felt that I was creative enough to pursue a career in arts, and I never felt that I was academic enough to pursue a career in history, unfortunately. And I stumbled across the conservation and restoration course at the University of Lincoln, and I looked at it and I thought, yes, that is exactly what I am supposed to do. And off I went in 2015 to the University of Lincoln, and I haven't looked back since. And a lot of the work that I did when I was at university was, there was quite a lot of analysis, science-based work, but also a lot of creativity as well. So things that I used to work on when I was at university were things like ceramics, gilding. We did archaeology, ethnography, so like household items. And depending on what condition you got them in, depending on what exactly you needed to do. So sometimes if you had a ceramic, it was completely smashed and it needed to not only be repaired, but it also needed to be then retouched so that you could look at it and then potentially not see the repair. So there's a bit of creativity there. There is history, because you need to research the pieces, the manufacturing methods, the techniques that they used, so that when you come to restore it or conserve it, it's the techniques that you use and the materials that you use are appropriate. So there's a lot of science, but there's also a lot of history in it as well. And there's a little bit of art. So it works really well. And I never thought I'd end up doing conservation. I hadn't even heard of being a conservator. And it was actually, I don't know if you've ever seen the programme Fake or Fortune with Fiona Bruce and Philip Mould. I used to watch that and I love that. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. That's the kind of thing I want to do. And here I am.
That's terrific. And it's a really good and I think this quite often as a Mosaic practitioner, and there's that real combination, isn't there? And when we were listening to the private view last night, talking to people, that combination of technically how do you achieve something you want to do, and what materials are you going to use, and also that creativity, and trying to often reference history too, and in what we do. This is a really good time to ask you a couple of really quite technical questions that we've had from Sandra. Thank you, Sandra. So one of the things that she's asked, and I realise that there's only so much detail you can probably go into on in this format, but how do you determine what characteristics the existing marble on the floor has in order to match an appropriate replacement type? So you talked about hard and soft. So how do you how do you do that?
Yes, so part of the cleaning process, I quite insisted on this actually, because I knew that there was going to be some level of damage to some of the tiles, and it's not enough to look at something and try and guess what it is, because there's that many different types of stone and ceramic out there. And it was very apparent when I was cleaning the mosaic that some of the tiles were definitely a lot softer than the others, just because they'd worn away quicker. So because of this, we sent some tiles off for analysis, and this was again carried out by the University of Lincoln. They have an excellent analysis science department there, and they were very, very helpful. One of the main things that was apparent was that the tiles, particularly the soft ones, are full of salt, and that was one of the glaringly obvious problems that we first encountered anyway. But they were able to tell you they can tell you the chemical composition, and then they can also say to you, they can also give you an idea of what they think it is based on its appearance and its chemical structure. So we have some limestone tiles, we have some slate tiles, we also have a few quartz-based tiles, no marble, unfortunately. I don't think the budget at the time quite stretched to marble. But that's what the difference between the hard and the soft. You've got the really soft limestone, which has just worn away quite quickly. And that's how we were able to determine what tiles were made of which ones. And you can tell when you look at them as well, you can pretty much have a look and you can kind of guess what it is. But I just wanted it to be confirmed before going out and trying to source replacements if it needed to happen. Because again, it all comes into that decision of ethics. You need to be able to say, well, this was chosen for this reason, and the evidence to back it up there.
We've got a couple of other questions that they're kind of related, so I'll ask them together. They've come from different people, but Coralie Turpin, who's a BAMM member in actually the Northeast, she's asking, will you be lifting the mosaic in sections or as individual tiles? And Sandra had a second question, which is, do you replace each piece of the lifted mosaic back into its original location, or reassemble as per the drawing as you would with a reproduction? And I think those are similar questions. So are you taking it out in sections, working on a section, replacing that whole bit, or are you working on it tesserae by tesserae?
So I very much insisted as well at the time that it be lifted in sections due to the complexity of some of the designs in certain areas. I think it's really important that it's very easy for pieces to get lost, particularly considering how small some of the pieces are. And ideally, I want to replace as few as possible. I want to use as much of the original material tesserae as I can. And in order to do that, it's important to lift it section by section. And by doing that, you can also then ensure that the pieces go back exactly where they came from. So I'll use the drawings that we've taken, and some of the pieces will have to go back exactly where they've come from because of the certain shape and how they sit within the design. Some of the more squarer pieces probably won't go back exactly where they came from in terms of specifically when it was lifted, but it will be from that same area. It won't be the piece from one corner then ends up in another corner. There'll have to be a lot of infill by hand, particularly when it's relayed, when the panels are relayed again as before. But again, they'll all be taken from sections and hopefully to go back in the original section that they came from.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and hopefully our people listening online will have really enjoyed those answers. Can I ask you both? I've been lucky enough to come up to the cathedral, and it felt to me like a very even we were just coming out of lockdown then, I think, and it felt even then like a very live building. There were people in there for all kinds of reasons, people coming as tourists, people obviously coming for to pray. There wasn't a service on at the time, but people were there clearly for private prayer. There are people who work there. There were people who were obviously just nipping through for a coffee in the really rather nice cafe. So can I ask you both about your interaction with visitors? It's such a range of people who are coming in, and how how you feel they respond to the work. And obviously we've got a particular interest in how people respond to the mosaics.
Yeah. Well, Aleta and I, funnily enough, when the video was playing, we were discussing this, and there are, I mean, certainly from my point of view, when I go to other cathedrals, because I personally, I'm not religious, so when I go to a cathedral, I see the building for the heritage and the history. And when I go to another cathedral, I know that there are teams there working to keep it standing, but you don't really see them. I couldn't walk into a cathedral unless I see somebody walking past with a chisel and a mallet. I wouldn't say, oh yes, you're definitely a stonemason. So when we're working on projects, I really do like people to ask me questions, because if I walk into a cathedral and I can't see anybody that I would instantly associate as a conservator or as a stonemason or as a joiner, then how would somebody who isn't trained know to look and recognise that? So when I'm working, I love to answer questions from the public if anybody has any questions, and generally there are lots of questions to be answered. More to do with a lot of similar questions to what we've been asked today about, will the pieces go back in their original place, and how do you determine what you need to replace them with? So yeah, that's, for me, that's the kind of interactivity that I have when I'm there working, and even when I'm walking along, or somebody will just say, oh, excuse me, do you work here? Can I ask you a question? And that's absolutely fine. I love talking to people and telling them about what I do, and I think that's because we're passionate, aren't we, really? Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. When you're passionate about your job, it's so easy to just go into not a lecture, but just get carried away. I mean, I'm doing it now, I'm getting carried away with myself, so yeah.
Aleta, is there anything you particularly want to add to that?
I think it's just lovely to talk to people about the things in the mosaic, the things in the cathedral, things like the mosaics, just to draw their attention to it, and just to talk about how they were made and why they were made. It's just, it's a privilege, isn't it, to talk about this building. And even pointing out small details that they may not have, because there's a big culture of, sometimes you have to tell people, well, don't touch that because it's fragile. But then sometimes, particularly the Erasmus mosaic that I worked on when I first came to the cathedral, I encourage people to touch it, because there are that mosaic was by master mosaicists, and there is no doubt about that whatsoever. It's a Salviati mosaic, and they're all glass tiles, and some of the tiles have been tilted slightly to reflect the light differently, so that it contours the faces of the figures in the mosaic. And you don't know that unless you're right up close and personal with it, and you can feel. And I say to people, touch it, feel it. Feel how they did it, because it won't damage it by running your fingers over the surface of it, but just feel the difference in the tiles. It's not just, don't just look at it from a distance, get up close and personal with it as well. And a lot of the time, they won't realise, and they're like, oh, I didn't know, and just pointing out small details to them. It's great to show people something that they've not learned before, because then they'll go away and then they'll talk about it with their friends and their family, and then more people come and you get more questions, and it's fantastic. Also, the pieces in that particular mosaic are so tiny, aren't they? Yes. Things like the faces and the drapery. And it's so, you get a real sense of the skill and the craftsmanship in that. Absolutely. It's just, people are often silent when they realise that how detailed they are, when you get really close to them. I mean, even when we were restoring that mosaic, because again, that had a lot of salt problems, and some of the pieces were falling off the wall, and we had to import some replacement tiles from Venice, and because the Murano glass, and it was a rush because it was getting towards that time when Italy was on holiday. It's in August sometimes. We were like, oh no, we're not going to get them. But the outlines on that mosaic are made from filaments of glass that are like finer than spaghetti,
you don't realise when you look at it, but then you're taking it apart to put it back together, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, and how they must have done it. I mean, it was a nightmare trying to do it for us, trying to get them all to stand up straight and keeping tight, and so the patience that they must have had to do it must have been immense.
We've got I think a lot of what you're saying about, I think a lot of us, practicing mosaicists will recognise a lot of this, won't they? When I first started to make and show my mosaics, I was a little bit taken aback by the fact that people immediately touched them, because I was like, people don't sort of touch a painting. And I was nervous that I hadn't actually attached them securely enough. I had visions of something that's actually quite heavy kind of falling off the wall on, let's hope not a dog or a small child or something, but it was that wanting to touch, and then realizing that you could encourage people, and people who were going to the children, no, don't touch, and I'm saying, no, do touch, but also reminding people that broken china is still broken china, and glass is glass. It's what it looks like. But yes, that whole, and then people sort of looking at things and then going, so do you put each bit of that in one at a time?
Yeah.
I liked your comment in the video about being patient, because people often say that to me, and no one who knows me in real life would think for a moment that I was a patient person, but there's something about Mosaic enables us to become more patient. We've had a question about the time span of the artwork in the cathedral, which is quite a kind of big question, about what's the sort of oldest and I guess the most recent piece of art. But I also wanted to ask about how important Dean Howson is in, I don't feel like we see many late Victorian mosaics in churches, unless I just haven't looked for them, but it doesn't feel to me that we see many. So I wondered how important he was, particularly in that period, but also can you give us a rough idea of the span, the time span of the artwork in the cathedral? Okay. And the decoration, I shouldn't call it artwork, because I think a lot of the time when it was done, it wouldn't have been seen as art specifically.
No, so we have, it depends what, like you say, it depends what you class as artwork. We have a lot of carved masonry, which is definitely decorative. Chester's made of sandstone, so it's not, you can't get as fine a detail on it as you could with limestone, unfortunately. But we do have some decorative masonry within the cathedral and on the outside as well. We have our choir stalls, and the majority of our choir stalls are medieval, so 13th, 14th century, particularly the misericords. So these are the seats that they sit on, that they'd sit on during the choir practice and the services. We do have some wall paintings as well in the nave and crossing, which are currently obscured by some pace stalls. But they're not very, you really do have to squint to see them, unfortunately, because they are quite old as well. But then you've got something, we have manuscripts that are illuminated. We have a 14th century manuscript that's illuminated that we have on display at the cathedral as well. So if you do get a chance to come and have a look at that, that's fantastic. And it goes all the way through to the Victorian period, and the Victorian period was really significant at Chester, as there was a lot of restoration works that occurred during that period. And our clerk of works at the time, James Frater, he wasn't clerk of works for very long, unfortunately, as he died. I think when he was about 45, but he was very significant and influential in the works that were carried on. At one point during that period, we had 150 stonemasons working at the cathedral to restore it, which is approximately 3 times more numbers of staff than we currently have working at the cathedral. So there was a lot of work that went on, and it wasn't all completely unnecessary work. A lot of it was vital to the protection of the building and to keep it standing. Some of it was a bit aesthetic, but the majority of it was just to keep the walls up, basically. So we have things from the Norman period, the early Norman period, right the way through up until now, really. And in the beginning of next year, we're hoping to install a pilgrim porch to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. So that will be the 21st century touch on the cathedral, and our current dean, Tim Stratford, he is involved with that. So it's not common that deans normally get involved with projects, but every now and then there's one that just likes to get involved and leave their mark and make the legacy known.
Oh, well,
I think it was Dean Howson for the Mosaics in the late 19th century.
Yes.
And in the early 20th century, Dean Bennett for the glazed cloister.
Yes.
And so, there are some who have left a significant mark on the building.
That's lovely to know. I'm conscious of time, and people who were at the AGM have gone straight into this. So some people might need just to be able to grab a brief break between this session and the next. So unless there's any final points any of you want. Sorry, Tracey, you sat there very patiently, but we didn't really talk more about the exhibition unless there's anything else you want to say.
Well, not really, not unless anybody has any burning questions to ask, which I'm very happy to answer.
But I'm sure they can address questions to yourself or Aleta about the exhibition specifically. But I'm going to wrap up just to say to everybody, thank you so much for being with us and for listening to the talk. 12 o'clock, we'll be able to hear from Tess Hunkin about the Hackney Mosaic project. Sorry, I lost my notes. You can tell, can't you? I can't speak without notes. So 12 o'clock, and we've got some really nice bits of video filling in between the sessions today to remind everybody of some of the past talks that we've had at BAMM and some of the things that have gone on. So there will never be a dull moment on your screen throughout today. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much. Thanks for your questions, and thanks for brilliant answers to the question.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
See you later.
See you later.